So it's very nice that devotees get together and they get the opportunity to hear about such an exalted personality, such as we are fortunate enough to know Srila Prabhupada. You've listened to other devotees speak, sharing their experiences with Srila Prabhupada. But you know, the more mature you become in your Krishna consciousness, you can see how everything that is taking place, transpiring in our lives on a day-to-day basis, is not by circumstance. There's nothing by chance. The Bhagavad-Gita explains to us this process of advancing in spiritual life takes many, many lifetimes. Bahunam janmanamante gyana prajate vasudevam sarvam iti sab mahatma suradulab. So after many, 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 many births and deaths, and going through all the different varieties of life, 8,400,000 species of life, we have assumed at one time or other in our life those different bodies. And the sole purpose of this transmigration of the soul is that at a certain point through these transmigrations, we will have the hankering to obtain knowledge. So we will decide that now, you know, is the time that I want to understand who am I, where have I come from, where am I going, why am I here, and all of us have gone through that stage, and at different points in our life, we made the decision that we were going to pursue spiritual activities. So some of us in later years of our life, and some of us in our youth made this decision. And we began a quest in search of that person that could give us this knowledge, this hankering. So at what time in our lifetimes also is different. It depends on how much progress we made in our previous life. And we begin again in this life to again pursue those questions. Each of us at one stage of our life when we made this decision, we had an accompanying partner in our hearts as super soul. And so when one's desire to understand the supreme absolute truth is strong enough, then Krishna, he will manifest himself. He is like the two birds sitting in the same tree. We were just talking about the birds living in this tree. But when you are ready to give you the solution to this dilemma of birth and death, Krishna will manifest himself in the form of his external manifestation, which is a guru. So we know that we have to approach a bona fide spiritual master. So there are many so-called spiritual masters or people who are projecting themselves to be spiritual masters. But there are two types of living entities. One is the cheater, and the other is the cheated. So if those persons are not dedicated or serious, they will be introduced to a cheater guru. And that cheater guru will misrepresent what is necessary for the living entity to do to obtain to spiritual perfection. So I cannot speak for everybody, but now as time has gone by, the instructions, the knowledge, and everything that is relevant for advancement in spiritual life is becoming more and more clear day by day. And of course, this is due to the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. And as I said, that everyone begins at a certain point in their life to resume their progress in going back home, back to Godhead. We can see we have different age people here, this young boy, young ladies. We have some old men. Maybe I'm the oldest, but we don't know this. But it's an opportunity that if you become serious, that you can, in this lifetime, go back to Godhead. So for me, I'll speak for myself. When did I begin to become curious about spiritual life? When did I start my quest? So I can remember that when I was 7 years old, I was in bed. I shared the bedroom with my brother, and I was laying in my bed, and I was thinking, who are those people in the next room? Who are they? And, I was very curious. And I wanted to know. And, of course, it's my mother and father. And I said, what does it mean, mother and father? He says, every house there is a mother, there is a father, there is children. The father is working, the mother's... At that time, women didn't work. They stayed at home. They were like a housewife. But I was determined to resolve these questions, and I wanted to find the answers to whom these are. And so in my home, there was no answers. It began, I came from a Presbyterian family, which is a branch of Christianity, and I asked my priest in the church, and I asked him, he says, if Jesus is the son of the only Son of God, then what am I? Well, God has only one son. What am I? And so this caught him off guard. He didn't know what to say, and so he told me, he says, "Oh, you're too young to ask such difficult questions." And then I asked my father. He was a successful man, and I asked him, "What's the most important thing in life?" And excuse the interpretation; it might have some vulgarity, but I asked him, "What is the most important thing?" And he says, "Most important thing in life is to work hard, make a lot of money, and after work, go out and get drunk. And after you get drunk, you try to find a woman. And then if you can't find a woman, you get in a fight." And so this was the wisdom that I was being given by my father. So I said that this man is a fool. I'm not going to listen. So I began running away from home at the age of 7, and I would go into the forest, and I would sleep outside under the tree or in a cave, and I came from a fairly wealthy family. We had everything nicely provided, but I knew that the answers that I wanted, they weren't coming from my school. The teachers in my school, they were also fools, and my mother and father were both fools. My priest at the church, he was also, he couldn't give me these answers. And so I wanted to find somebody. So we know that in the case of Dhruva Maharaj, so he wanted to have a kingdom more wealthy than his father. So he asked his mother, "Where can I go?" So she told him to go to the forest. And in the forest, there are many sages and wise people. Of course, my parents didn't tell me this, but I went and I would look, but there was nobody. There was nothing. And my age began to mature from 7 years to 8 years to 9 years, 10 years. So all this time I was running away from home. I couldn't stay in my home. And so at the age of 16 years old, the police came and they took me to a prison. And they put me in prison for 1 year. So I stayed in that prison for 1 year. And then, of course, I was at that time becoming more curious. My mind was maturing, and I wanted more and more to know about God. I had some recollections of, God is in the body, or I am in this body. So I wanted to know where am I in this body? Where does, so I could make a distinction between flesh and spirit, even at that young age. And so there were no books or no one to ask anywhere to get this secret, sublime information. And so when my 1 year was finished in the prison, they took me back to my mother and father's house, and there was one man, he was in charge of my case. I was under his supervision, and he told me that if you don't follow your parents, you're going to go back to jail until you're 25 years old. And so as soon as he left, I looked around my house, and I decided, even though it's a big, beautiful house, it was like an empty shell. So I ran away again. And at this time, the hippie movement was beginning. And this was in 1967. So in 1967, all of the hippies went to San Francisco. And so I went to San Francisco, and I was in the park with other hippies, and we were, trying to do yoga, and we were talking about meditation and taking different types of drugs and everything. But then from a distance, I started to hear this sound. And so I was listening to that sound, and then below where I was sitting, there was a truck, a big open flatbed truck, and on the back of the truck there was Lord Jagannath, Balaram and Subhadra, and just a few people wearing robes with shaved heads, dancing behind Lord Jagannath, and they were chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. So I didn't understand too much what this was, but I knew that this mantra, because already I was chanting Om many hours a day, but when I heard the chanting of Hare Krishna, I knew that this mantra had some great significance, and so I began thinking about it, and I wanted to incorporate it into my lifestyle. And so I I went the next day to this one. It was like a shop, which was run by a group of hippies, and they were giving food away to other hippies, clothes, food, and everything. And so I went there and I asked them if they had any vegetarian food, because I was already vegetarian. This was when I was 16. I became vegetarian, but I asked, "Do you have any vegetarian food?" And they said no. But if you go next door, those people, they have vegetarian food. And so I went to the shop next door and I knocked on the door, and nobody came to answer. So I knocked again, and then I opened the door slowly and I looked inside, and the smell of incense was coming up, and there was again Lord Jagannath, Baladev, Subhadra, and a big picture of Srila Prabhupada. And so I didn't go inside because I felt this was a sanctified place and I was contaminated. And so I left and I went to Hawaii. And in Hawaii, I went to the island of Maui. And I went into the jungles in Maui, and I built a little hut in the jungle with abundance of fruit trees and a nice stream and a waterfall. And I would spend all day long doing yoga, hatha yoga, astanga yoga. And then I had a cave that I would sit inside this cave, and then I would om, and the om vibration would ricochet off of the walls of the cave. And when I needed food, I would go out and gather from the trees bananas, mangoes, papayas, guavas, all kinds of fruit. So much was abundantly there. And as I was walking and gathering fruit, then I would chant the Hare Krishna mantra. And so I remembered the mantra, I chanted this mantra, and then I would collect the food, and then I knew nothing about God, who was God, where was God situated, but I set the food down on the ground, and to me it was an amazing experience that some person was able to make a banana tree, a mango tree, a papaya tree, a guava tree, all of these trees right next to each other with such an array of flavors and tastes. And then I would offer more of an impersonal interpretation of it, but I would give thanks for whoever supplied me with this bounty of food. And then I would go back to my bhajan kuntir, or my little hut, and stay there and continue with my meditation and my chanting. And of course we know that Krishna is situated in everyone's heart, right? And he is waiting for the opportunity to introduce us to his external manifestation. And who is that external manifestation? The Guru Maharaj, the spiritual master. Yes, and so circumstances had arranged that I leave Hawaii and I go back to the mainland, and I go to the city of Seattle. Seattle is in Washington State, and so I was there, and how I wound up going there is that on the airplane flying back, the boy sitting next to me, when they served lunch, they were giving us sandwiches made with meat. And so I told him, here, you can have my sandwich. I don't eat meat. I'm vegetarian. And so then he had in his pocket a little card that someone had given him in Seattle, and it was an invitation to go to a vegetarian feast and also to learn and practice bhakti-yoga. And so these things were the two things that were a priority in my life. And so I immediately went to the temple, and it was an old house in the university area, and I opened the door and I looked inside, and there I saw again Lord Jagannath, Baladev, Subhadra, and Prabhupada, a picture of Prabhupada. But this time they were small. So the ones that I had seen in San Francisco, these were the first deities that we had in ISKCON, and they had been carved by Shamasundar. And later he carved a second set, which were only about this big, and they opened the temple in Seattle. So at that time, there was only 7 Hare Krishna temples in ISKCON, and so only 2 of them, the one in San Francisco and our temple in Seattle, were fortunate enough to get the deities. So when I saw the deities and I saw the picture of Srila Prabhupada and the devotees there, they were all brahmacharis. There was only 4 of them, but I knew that, now they're going to chant Hare Krishna. And so I went to the back of the room, and I was waiting for them to chant, and they started chanting Hare Krishna, and then I became exhilarated and excited, and I immediately started chanting. So this was the first time for me to chant Hare Krishna with other than by myself, and so I was so excited, and then afterwards it was time to eat. We're going to have the feast, and so they started serving out these dishes of vegetarian foods, and because I was already a vegetarian, they gave us like samosas and chapatis and pakoras and rice and vegetables and all of these nice dishes. But when they give me the chapatis and the puris, then I says, I know how to make these. I was making those when I was in Hawaii, and then other things, different things, and then one boy, his name was Haridas. He was from Los Angeles originally, but he had come to the Seattle temple, and when I sat down with him, he began to speak about Srila Prabhupada, telling me, of course, what a wonderful person he was. And he said that Srila Prabhupada is planning to make a world Sankirtan party. And he's going to choose 14 of his disciples and take them all around the world to help him spread this Sankirtan movement. So I didn't give too much thought at that because it was my first day in the temple, but everything else was very compatible to my feelings and my life at that time. And so I told the boy Haridas, he says, I want to move into the temple. And he said, when? And I said, now, today. And so they were very happy to get a new devotee, and they allowed me to move into the temple. And you have to remember, at that time, ISKCON was very new. It was only a couple years old, at the most 2 years old. And so we didn't have, as you have today, an abundance of different literatures, but the only books that we had was the one that Prabhupada printed here in India, the Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto. And so they gave me one set of those books, 3 of those books in the first canto, and they said, this is like our Bible. And so we read this and we study this, and this will tell us everything we need to know about God. And so I was overwhelmed at first by the Sanskrit verses, and then the word-by-word translations, and then deep, heavy knowledge and questions that had been perplexing me from when I was a child. Srila Prabhupada answered in the first few pages, and I thought that this man he knows everything, and so I'm going to follow him. I'm going to do whatever I can, because from that moment I felt extreme gratitude to Srila Prabhupada, because he was there and he began to answer all of my questions, everything that had perplexed me. And I said, I will follow him forever. And because as I was living in Hawaii, and I lived a life of like a hermit or a mendicant, I was very austere, very strict. And so I had moved into the temple, and on the second or third day, they made me the pujari, because the other devotees couldn't wake up to do Mangal Arti. And so I'd only lived in the temple, 1 or 2 days, and they made me the pujari. And then they also said, okay, and we also want you to be the cook. So, because I was a good cook. And so, of course, I took on these things, but, we didn't have prayer books or anything like that, or, and we only had one Srimad Bhagavatam, after we would have our breakfast, then we would go out and we would do Sankirtan. So there were 4 devotees, and 2 devotees would chant, and 2 devotees would distribute Back to Godhead magazines. So at that time, the magazines, they were kind of photocopy style, very cheap, and we sold them for whatever money, but we would stay out for at least 10 hours a day, chanting and taking turns selling books, and then you go home at night and have some, hot milk, and then go to sleep for whatever little amount of time you could, and then wake up in the morning, and the day would start again. And it was all because of Srila Prabhupada. So as myself, the other devotees, I can never really say what was going on in their minds, because Krishna reveals himself to each of us according to how we surrender to him. He says, I will reward you according to your surrender. So for me, I knew that I was so determined that I made it my vow that I would do anything for Srila Prabhupada. So ISKCON was a new society, and at this time I had not met Srila Prabhupada physically, only through the pictures we had of him, and through the Srimad Bhagavatam. Even Bhagavad-Gita we didn't have. So slowly some of the books began to come. The Bhagavad-Gita, and then teachings of Lord Chaitanya came, and Sri Upanishads came. But this took time. So the devotees that I had seen in San Francisco, they went to England. And in England, of course, we know that they met the Beatles, and Srila Prabhupada left, and he went to England to join his disciples, and they were the first pioneers to go out to spread this. So it took Prabhupada a long time. He was gone for a long time, but we persevered, and we continued to do our daily service, do Sankirtan, and we were just waiting for the opportunity. So at that time, many devotees were getting their initiations by mail. Prabhupada would give you, and so I didn't want to take initiation that way. I wanted to be there with Prabhupada and take my initiation with him. And so I waited and waited and waited, and then in 1970, Prabhupada came back to the west coast of the United States, and at that time they were having a Rath Yatra festival. and they had 3 big carts. This time they had made 3 big carts, and Srila Prabhupada was going to participate in the Rath Yatra festival, and I was so excited because we had driven from Seattle down to San Francisco to help with the preparations for this Rath Yatra festival. And it would be my first time to physically see Srila Prabhupada. So I was looking so much forward for that but unfortunately anyway, Prabhupada wasn't able to ride on the Rath Yatra cart because at that time there was a militant group called the Black Panthers. Sorry, just one second. The Black Panthers said that they were going to intervene into the Rath Yatra festival. So for Prabhupada's safety, we didn't let him ride on the Rath Yatra cart. But he did come and he got out of the car and he was dancing in front of Lord Jagannath. And so I have a picture of me standing right next to Srila Prabhupada. Tomorrow I'll bring, you can see. But he was standing there, and when he saw Lord Jagannath, he was jumping in the air, and he was like floating. And for me, it was one of the most exciting days because I had waited 2 years already to meet Srila Prabhupada. And at the end of the festival, we continued and we went to Los Angeles. And so Los Angeles, they had just bought a new temple, which was a church. And so they were, preparing it, and they had already gotten some deities from India. And Srila Prabhupada was going to give me initiation. He was going to give me initiation, and so I was so excited. And one morning prior to the initiation, some devotees came and they in front of Srila Prabhupada's Vyasasan, they set up a reel-to-reel recording machine, because back then they didn't have cassette players or any kind of, everything was really prehistoric back in those days. And so, and I asked, what's going to happen? And he says, Prabhupada is going to come down and he's going to chant japa with us. And I was so excited. So I sat just like where Prabhupada is here. I sat right there, like on that little carpet in front of him, and I wanted to make a first impression on Srila Prabhupada and show him how great of a yogi I was, because I could do all of the yogic postures, and I could do this, and so I sat in a lotus position, the full lotus position, sitting there, and as Srila Prabhupada was chanting, I was mimicking him, his voice, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, and then I would be saying the same time, the same momentum as him. And while I was chanting like that, suddenly I started to feel a pain in my legs, and then I couldn't sit anymore like that, and so I it was unbearable. And so like this young girl is sitting here, Prabhupada was chanting, he stopped chanting, he looked at me and he said, "Sit properly." So everyone has heard Prabhupada chanting japa and heard him say, sit properly. And so that was me. So my first impression was not so good, because that was the very first words Prabhupada ever said to me. So he chastised me on that day. So I felt so bad after that. But the next day was my day to get initiated. And there were a few other devotees from Vancouver and Seattle who were also going to get initiated. And Srila Prabhupada was sitting on his Vyasasana chanting on our beads. And the fire sacrifice was going on, and then it became time to get our beads and our names. And so in my mind, I kept thinking, oh, I hope Prabhupada gives me easy name. I hope he gives me an easy name. Oh, because now there are so many names coming from so many different places in the scriptures, but we didn't have any books, we didn't have anything, so how would I remember? So the first boy to go up, he was from Vancouver, and his name was John, Bhakta John, and he went to get his beads, and Srila Prabhupada asked, he says, what are the 4 regulated principles? And then he would tell him, and he says, how many rounds are you supposed to chant every day? 16 rounds. And then he says, okay, your name is Sridhar. And so I was thinking, oh, Sridhar, that's a pretty easy name. Oh, yeah, that's a good one. And then the next person to go up, his name was Robert. And the same questions Prabhupada asked each of us. And he said, your name is Romharshan Sutta. And then I thought, oh no, that's a terrible name. That's so hard. How can I ever remember that name? Oh no. And then next it was my turn to go up. And then again he asked me, what are the 4 regulated principles? How many rounds will you chant every day? Is it possible for you to do all of these things? And then I said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. And he says, okay, your name is Gopal. Gopal. He says, is that okay? And I said, yes, Prabhupada. Thank you so much, Prabhupada. So we're supposed to speak for 3 days, so I have 2 more days. So I have many stories because I was very lucky to be one of Srila Prabhupada's pioneers in everything that's happening here in India and other countries. So maybe if anyone has a question they want to ask or something. Well, you know, to be very truthful and honest with you, is that I joined ISKCON very early, maybe in the first 50 or 100 devotees, and all of the gurus that are here today, I don't know. I don't even know them because my mission was always to be like a pioneer. So maybe they, you know, by that time many temples were being made in America, but Srila Prabhupada, which I will talk about later, but he always sent me someplace to some foreign country by myself. So, yeah. Okay, so we'll meet tomorrow again, and I'll try to cover, because I have many years from 1967 until 2021. a lot of time. Okay. Hare Krishna. Thank you.